Okay, I'm going to keep this pretty short. Those of you who follow name droppers and some of the other DNS mailing lists know that BIND9 was released in its first public beta last week, and folks at ISC are pretty excited about that. And I will say that I'm late getting Susan my slides because I didn't want them to be out of date. I didn't want to say that they had been that BIND9 had been released if it actually hadn't. Oh boy. You may just be stuck on this slide for a while. Anybody know how to work these things? Okay. ISC does not have any employees. There are no programmers who work for ISC and draw a paycheck from ISC. The reason being it's a nonprofit, and it's very difficult to get a programmer to come to work if you're not giving them equity, given that the folks down the street are giving much better deals. So ISC has a prime contractor. It has always had a prime contractor of one kind or another. The evolution of the prime contractor is that there is now a company called Nominum, and it shares a couple of board members with ISC, has a relatively similar goal set. It will eventually do work other than as the prime contractor for ISC, but the employees of Nominum Inc. are the ones who actually did the implementation of BIND9 and will be taking care of it until the end of that contract sometime later this year. Rick Adams founded ISC. Carl Malamud took a shift running it. Jerry Scharf took a shift running it. I took a shift. Dave Conrad has taken a shift. And it is someone else's turn. We are looking for someone who would like to push open source implementations of core internet protocols. And it's a nonprofit, so it was an excellent job for someone who has already earned a bundle of stock somewhere else. The board of directors for ISC is myself, David Conrad, Evie Nemeth, Steve Wolf, and Toys Hagen. Pretty diverse. Nothing is a slam dunk. Getting ISC to move forward is not impossible, but it isn't. It's not just a pet organization. It's a real company that has different people who have different ideas of what the mission is, and that's been good, that diversity. BIND9 is still open source. Those of you who have followed my incessant flaming on various mailing lists over the years know that I don't really like the GNU copyright very much. I am in favor of software that you can truly do anything you want with, and so all of our software is under a BSD-derived copyright. It complies with almost all of the standards that the IETF has published in the DNS area. I say almost because some of those standards are themselves not finished, and we are active in the DNS working groups in the IETF. We wanted BIND9 to be scalable in some of the ways which BIND8 was most painfully not scalable. One of those was the size of the biggest zone you could handle. Rather than being limited to the amount of RAM you have on hand, it's now limited to the amount of backing store that you'd like to commit to the purpose. So whereas BIND8 had a few hundred different call sites spread throughout the server that all knew exactly what the structure of the in-memory database was, BIND9 has API barriers all over the place to allow you to abstract that any way you want. So in other words, the part of the code that consumes DNS data from a cache or from a zone does not have any information about how it is stored. Number of zones is still limited by memory. That was not something, the performance of pushing that out is too terrible. However, a couple 100,000 zones is still a lot smaller than the COM zone, and so this is number of zones being limited by memory is not really a problem in today's hardware environment. Multiprocessor scalability is very important, especially given DNS security. BIND8 was a single-threaded program. If you ran it on an SMP system, it didn't really matter. It pretty much sat on one CPU and ran that one to the max. BIND9, on the other hand, is able to use as many CPUs as you want to dedicate. We do lose 10% of the total performance of the second and subsequent CPUs, which might sound like a lot until you consider that most SMP kernels lose about 50%. Commercial support is available from Nominum for this code, and it is actually supportable code. We're pretty proud of it. What it has in it is a relatively full DNSSEC implementation, and again, I can't say full. The slide says full, but DNSSEC is not itself done. There are aspects of how to do DNS security that people are still trying to puzzle out. Mentioned that it's able to use all the CPUs in your box. What else can we add here? RFC conformance. There are a number of new DNS protocols or protocol amendments, such as eDNS0, that allows you to transmit datagrams larger than 512 bytes. Again, this is very important for DNS security. We've got incremental zone transfer that BIND8 has tried to have, but it never really worked. In BIND9 it really does work. Notify, dynamic DNS. TSIG is a transaction signature system that is based on shared secrets, more or less like just entering a clear text password on both sides of some transaction, so that you don't have a key exchange protocol. You just use the shared secret, or the secret that you already share, in order to prove that that you're allowed to make a certain transaction. This sounds trivial, since it's what we've been doing with Telnet for a long time, but in DNS it was not trivial, and that's working. And this is all new. It's possible that some of the tools like DIG will not be rewritten for BIND9, but everything else, the server, the libraries, everything that you have grown to know as BIND8 or BIND4 was swept aside. This is completely new, done by people who were not also charged with doing maintenance releases of BIND8. So for the last 2 years, I have done all of the maintenance releases of BIND8, while a completely new set of people, by a mostly new set of people, has done BIND9. It took about a half year to design it, about a year of 7.5 people to implement it. We just did our first public beta, and by May we expect our first full public release. There are other DNS implementations in the offing, not just the ones that are commercial, but there are a couple of other open source DNS implementations. But I don't expect that they will bite the bullet and do DNS security or the various IPv6 extensions for quite some time. These turn out to be pretty difficult. We didn't change the complexity of the DNS system by 10% over the last couple of years with all these new RFCs. Probably more like 300 or 400%. There are new mailing lists, and you can request to be added to the one that you think pertains to what you're going to be doing with this code. And the release notes are available at the URL at the bottom of the slide, or just go to www.isc.org and work your way down. And with that, I'm open to questions. Bill, I need a question. Help me out here.
I have an Intel Paragon.
Say it again.
I have an Intel Paragon with 1024 processors.
do you run P threads?
Yeah.
Okay.
Works?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'd love to have one to try it, but there's no reason in principle that wouldn't work. We did not do any of the foolish sorts of quadratic linked listy or array-based or any of that sort of management that assumed that n would be a small number. Stephen?
24-processor machine.
Can we have the beginning of the question again, please?
Who would give Bill a 1024 processor machine? Stephen Stewart.
Question over here. Not a BIND9 question, or the answer might be BIND9. Tracking the search advisories, what is the oldest version of BIND currently recommended that operators should run?
Oh boy. So there was a CERT advisory not too long ago recommending that no version of BIND currently in circulation be run by anyone. And we are working on that. If you're running BIND4 and it is a vendor system, then you're in trouble. In other words, if you got a version of BIND4 with your computer, then you have probably got a lot of people using your computer that are not showing up in the PS listings. If you go to www.isc.org, it will point you at the current safe or thought to be mostly safe version of BIND4. But one thing to recognize about the safety of BIND is that DNS itself, until we get DNS security working, DNS is not safe. And it's pretty easy to spoof transaction sources or transaction destinations using the protocol without security. That's why we've spent, probably $1 million of your tax money working on DNS security in the last couple of years. So in BIND 8, the current published version is 8.2.2, patch level 5. There were reports of a patch level 6 unconfirmed reports of a patch level 6. We are preparing a BIND 8.2.3 just to sort of sweep up the last couple of problems. But actually, just to get back to what I said a moment ago, that CERT release describes errors which anyone who has write access to a primary zone file can take over your server. But usually that is not something that users can do, and so you're okay. And really it just turned out that the parser, if you could call it that, for primary zone files is not very good about length checking. But again, primary zone files tend to be root owned, so that's not necessarily a huge gaping hole. We will fix that problem in 8.2.3 along with some other things.
You mentioned integration with third-party network management software. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
There has been a DNS MIB for some time. As far as I know, no one ever implemented it. There's no version of DNS server or client software anywhere that speaks the DNS MIB. The reason BIND did not speak it, I suppose, was because I was not running SNMP at the time and didn't really care. But it was also that no one ever contributed a version of it, nor did anyone ever contract with ISC to get it developed. And those are the three reasons code ever went in. Either we needed it, or somebody gave it to us, or somebody paid us to do it. That never happened for the DNS MIB in BIND 8. It is happening for the DNS MIB in BIND 9. Bill?
Sean actually points out an interesting thing, which I think a few of us have seen in the past, which are interoperability anomalies that occur between versions. And with the significant changes in BIND version 9, is there going to be an attempt by ISC to actually collect enough data to build an interoperability matrix?
Um,
Is that of interest?
Well, it is certainly of interest, and Bill, you were there during the early so-called GAB discussions, which resulted in the contract for BIND9 being let to ISC. What happens with regression testing of that kind is that people really want it because they understand how important it is, and they know that the network won't be truly stable unless this sort of testing is done, and then the software is made to pass such tests until they see the price tag. And then they say, maybe we can leave that part out. So while ISC understands the importance of it and would like to undertake the work, it's a nonprofit. And somebody who has money needs to think this is important, and right now that hasn't happened. So we do it informally to the best of our ability. We have a test lab where we run all sorts of different versions, but it is not done rigorously because that would require dedication of resources that we simply cannot afford.
Thank you.
Steve?
There were a few, at least to me, confusing email messages about interactions between Windows 2000 and Bind, and I couldn't tell whether it's a log file problem, people really updating your zones if they happen to be running Windows 2000, or just pilot error and no problem. Could you explain to me at least what's going on?
I will, but for those of you who weren't on the Bind workers list at that time, I'll sort of explain what was going on, or what was reported, and then I'll tell you what I think it meant. Someone was starting to bring Win 2000 up inside their enterprise, and naturally people love to take a new version of the software and hunt around in the menus and try and see what sort of capabilities exist that aren't the default. What could I be turning on? What should I be turning off? And there's a general deprecation of wins inside of Win 2000. They can still speak the WINS protocol, which is the proprietary Windows naming system, but they don't prefer it. They prefer DNS. The reason that Microsoft didn't use DNS originally and went with WINS was not simply that they like things to be proprietary, but rather the DNS at that time had no dynamic update capability. They used their naming system for resource discovery. That means that when a server comes up and is a mail relay, let's say, that is capable of sending outbound mail from a LAN to somewhere that isn't on the LAN, it goes and registers itself in the naming system by a well-known name, something like mail-relay or something like that, so that the clients don't have to be statically configured. The whole idea here is that administrative desktops ought to more or less self-configure. And in a pure Microsoft environment, this tends to work. It's only when you have a mixture of non-Microsoft mail clients or whatever that this kind of thing starts to fall apart. But since we do have DNS dynamic update now, Microsoft is now using it, and they have tried hard to abandon their proprietary technology. But they had a security model crisis where they used Kerberos, but Kerberos didn't do everything they needed to do. Those of you who have run NT systems know that it's possible to be in various privilege groups and then to grant resources to various privilege groups, and then it is sort of a set intersect between the groups you have and the group the resource needs that allows you to do whatever it is that you're trying to do in an NT environment. They put those groups at the end of the Kerberos tickets that their ticket granting servers grant. And they are in a place that the Kerberos standard says is available for vendor extensions of this kind. But they will not say the format of those that extended data area. That makes them incompatible in subtle ways with other Kerberos key distribution systems or with other protocols that use Kerberos to do their authentication. They are using Kerberos with this extension to secure their dynamic update transactions. Bind, by its nature, cannot understand this because it's a proprietary extension that Microsoft has not seen to publish the format of, and who knows what we would really do with an NT group identifier anyway. So if you turn on certain features which are not the default, and your name servers are running bind, and your clients are running Win2000, and your mail server is running Win2000, bind will sort of complain endlessly about all of the supposedly unauthenticated update attempts that are coming from all of these mysterious Win2000 systems. It looks a lot like a denial of service attack if you're a name server operator. But I don't think that Microsoft intended it as one, and I think if we smarten up our logging a little bit to rate limit those or to just provide a better explanatory text, that a lot of this will just go away. Is that what you needed to know, Steve? Anyone else? There are other people out there eating your cookies.